Are video games becoming too intuitive? And what I mean by intuitive is easy to use or learn without any special knowledge. So someone who doesn't really play games or doesn't even play games at all can pick up a controller and play this game without really having to do any learning. They just pick up and they can go straight through it. There's no they don't get confused, they don't get lost very easily. And I say this because some games are becoming very easy, to the point where it feels like games are kind of playing itself, or very little input is needed by the player to actually play a complete, or they're very difficult to fail. One example is particularly with Sony games and with God of War, where this person asks, puzzles are made too easy because of the head, and boy, he says they are too quickly to help puzzles. For example, there's a small puzzle in the first realm and you need to complete before continuing on. While I was looking around for the hidden areas and hadn't even turned my attention to the puzzle yet, they both had spelled out a solution for me within 15 seconds. It doesn't really give the player any time to actually think about what they need to do. It's just like, this is what you have to do. And maybe perhaps what's the point of even having these puzzles in the game if you're just told what to do? That's not really a puzzle, is it? It's just an obstacle at that point. And someone even pointed they wish they made hints optional. Apparently Uncharted gives you hints if you click in L3. I just want to be explored and work things myself without being spoon-fed, which is was an issue, is that it felt like you just, this is what's happening, this is what you need to do. Other games, I believe, like Horizon, where the character would just constantly be speaking like, I should go and do this, to suggest to the player that they should go over there, not really leaving them to their own imagination. Something like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, the player, Link never speaks. It's you're thrown into this world, you got quests to do, you just do whatever you want in whatever order, and that's why some people like that game. It's just a nice juicy open world, and the player does what they want. They let their imagination, they let their I should check out this light. They're not being told to do that. They're feeling, they see it and they're going to check it out, or they see something else and they're going to do it. The developers of God of War have done a few GDC talks that go through the combat, and this one is on level design and showing you how that they teach the player to a combat item, and then the way the camera angles show that this is focused on the thing that they then just learned to then use it, and so they've made this game that is so straightforward to the players that it shows them that here you got this item and then you can use it here. And there's nothing really wrong with this, because both God of War and Ragnarok are excellent games. People absolutely loved them. They really enjoyed them. They weren't overcomplicated. They had a nice story to them. They looked great, and people enjoyed the gameplay of it. And well, it's obvious with these GDC articles that they've completely nailed down the way the game plays. They even have the whole level to level flow. They've looked at what people are doing and how they've built upon that. They've shown that you got this item, how to use it, and then later on show it with a clear indication that this is where you can then use it, and you don't get lost in the game. And for a lot of people, this simple linear flow is great. I think even people who prefer challenging games, a more relaxing game, unless there's obviously of course a harder difficulty, and these are just well-rounded games. On the other side, in terms of difficulty, you have the From Software games like the Dark Souls and the Elden Ring, and these are some older articles, but because back when these games released, they were obviously, I mean still are, still very challenging. And some journalists, or at least this journalist, they fear that yes, Dark Souls 3 badly needs an easy mode, and they even did one for Sekiro, saying Sekiro tries needs to respect players by adding an easy mode. And even some other journalists chimed in, just this one on Medium, which is talking about the accessibility of it, and specifically focuses on this one, and it's a pretty meaty one, and does bring in the question of accessibility and sort of difficulty. And I think it's wrong because it says, From Software could just follow the footsteps of nearly all other games when creating this mode. Crafting this mode is not common, just up the amount of damage the character does and the lessen the amount the enemy does. Maybe some scaling for later levels in a 2. It's just like a really deep misunderstanding of creating a difficult in games. This can be a very not fun way. Just simply changing the values of how much damage you take and how much you give is not simple. It's what we would consider artificial difficulty scaling. It doesn't in any way make the game more fun or difficult, because you do less damage, or you do more damage, or you take less damage, and it can just be a real walk in the park. You have all these like projectiles and stuff you have to dodge. Well, actually, if it's on easy difficulty, you don't have to do that, because you can just tank so much damage or heal so much. It becomes a very unfun experience. And even I was recently playing Fallout 4, and I didn't try it on the survival difficulty, which is apparently very fun. I was trying it on the hard difficulty, and all it was that it made it so you did less damage to enemies and you took more damage, and So what ended up happening was the enemies just became a bullet sponge, and I was just kind of running out of ammo, not being able to kill enemies, and I was running out of healing hits because I was taking so much damage. And it was just an unfun experience. It's like, oh, I was shooting them about 20 times, and then they'll eventually die. And it was just like, oh, this is such an unrewarding, unfun experience. It doesn't weigh, like, the AI doesn't have unique mechanics that are only there on hard mode to make it hard mode. So, and just because a game like Dark Souls is difficult, that doesn't make it any less intuitive or any less accessible. And in fact, Dark Souls and the From Software games have really some of the simplest UI. You can't go wrong, you can't really get confused with it. And if we scroll down to the actual sort of gameplay here, that's all there is to it. You have your items that are on your hotbar, and you have your health, your magic, and your stamina, and the buff you have on it. And it tells you what location you're at when you walk into it. It also tells you how much currency you got, or the souls or something, for example, in Dark Souls. And the rest is just visual, so you can see it. Unlike other games, so we look at more recent games like there's Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and this is an image from the UI. You can't see it because my head's in the way. I can actually move it. It says the screenshot of the HUD from Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, almost fried my brain. Yeah, just look at what the fuck is going on here. You got the ammo, yeah, you got the health, and you got other things. You got loads of numbers. You can't see the enemy. You got this weird like lens flare on. You got this thing in the center, and it's just too much information on the screen that doesn't really make sense, or doesn't even need to be there. But for the player, I imagine you can play a game. This is very much a heat at the moment where all the UI is flooding you at once. So that is something to be think of. But say again, does all this information really need to be on the screen? You'd probably clear it up for the game itself. And even some great games like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I'll zoom in a bit, a game I really enjoy. I thought it was a great game, but the one thing that sucks about a lot of their games is the UI is just not great. Look at how much of this UI takes up the actual screen. So you got all these guys' health bars taking up like 10%. You've got this bottom bar which takes up like 20%. You then got the big boss health bar taking up a lot of the screen. You got this big circle for the specials. You got the amount of enemies you have, and then you have all this information, the XP, the CP, and then this little triangle in the center here is the enemy that you've currently targeted, and it can be confusing what character you're actually targeting because there's so much players and stuff happening on the screen. I do think Nintendo are not the best with UIs. They traditionally do have terrible UIs in their games. They just want to have all these stylized UIs when I just think they should be so much more simple. I really prefer simple UIs, just like Elden Ring, and they have got it sometimes correct, like with Metroid Dread has again a very simple UI. And if we scroll down to the gameplay, even the HUD of the player's character looks super simple, big nice letters. Map is more clear, a bit more complicated, but you see the other players here, and then the buttons are nice and clear as well, the information's there. And then this is what it looks like in game. The health, the ammo, and lovely highlighting colours and what I think. You can tell that this is different to the background. These are all targeted and they're also glowing green, meaning you can do something to this. The orange lines here signify it's a door, and the green light, the door correlating to the green lights you need to hit. These 2D's Metroid. And Metroid has generally superb intuitiveness that we can look at. And just to look at one more bad example of UI, it's got to be Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U. This is perhaps one of the worst user interfaces in a game. It is very complicated. So you just have all this random sort of gibberish like, oh, the Smash, the blah blah blah. And there was an actual sort of arcade mode, which is kind of a key feature to it. Now, where do you get to it? Is it in the big smash button, you might think? No, that just gives you the normal player versus player. Like, no, you have to go to this blue button, the games and more, and then you have to go to the solo button here, and then eventually you get to the classic order. It's in that small button there, hidden away, and I would always get lost in this UI. It's very just confusing on what is going on and where all the traditional modes that are in Smash Bros are hidden away in this layer of UI. They did improve it in Smash 5, the next one for the Switch, Smash Ultimate, and they made it significantly clear. Basically 4 buttons, they all go to somewhere and they'll tell you what to do, and they're all of equal importance and size. They're not just these random sizes like, oh, challenge is small, this one is small, and Smash Tour is slightly bigger, and then the online is a circle, and it's like, oh, okay. With limited resources, we go back to the original Metroid, you couldn't have all this dialogue option telling you what to do, and no better than the original Metroid on the NES. trying to teach a player upgrades. This game wasn't very intuitive when it launched as well. It wasn't very clear where you had to go and what you had to do. You just sort of had to explore and hope and find stuff. But they had these moments like this, like the first item, which was the morph ball, and the player would jump up over the top, collect the morph ball, but they can't jump back in, meaning that they would have forced to use the morph ball, and that would just teach them this is what to do. I was like, oh, I can fit through these one tile gaps now. And that was a very world environment based way of teaching the player that is very effective, because it doesn't, rather than just telling them text, this is what they do, because sometimes players can skip through it and it's like, oh, now what do I do with this item? But this one is like, you have to directly use it, and even if it takes the player a bit of time, eventually they have to figure it out. They can't go on with the game and not figure it out, and then it comes to a boss fight, it's like, I don't know what to do. So great use of info of the environment. But sometimes it can perhaps be a bit too obvious. One of the more infamous issues is yellow paint that's been used in video games, and that is just items that you can interact with are just painted yellow with some sort. So this is in Resident Evil 4 remake, and it's just this ladder that is covered in splatters of yellow paint to signify to the player that yes, you can climb this ladder. And it's kind of, some people, there's been arguments saying yes, people are so dumb that they don't know how to where to go. Like when developers have done playtesting, and what they thought was obvious, like this was the only ladder that they could climb in like a narrow corridor, they would somehow miss it and they get confused, and that you need to put this play on to show them. There has been debates around that. This is not the only game. The other one is something like Final Fantasy. See here, yellow paint virus has infected the latest Final Fantasy 7 with these yellow looking rock ledges for you to climb. And are these a big deal? Perhaps not, because they're just kind of there and it's like, oh, I need to climb this, and it's just like I climb it, and it's like, it doesn't take away too much from the game. It's just kind of signifies it, makes it obvious to the player that this is what they can interact with. But in some sense it could take away from the atmosphere or the immersion of the game if it's just these random items that are yellow that you can then interact with, rather than giving the player like the knowledge that actually this is climbable, that they can sneak onto. It kind of depends on sort of the where it is in the game. If it's just like an area that the player can explore that is completely optional, then it's different. But if it's a place where the player actually needs to go as part of the main story, then, and if it gets too confusing, then perhaps they do need the yellow paint. But I do think there's probably a better way. The original Resident Evil 4 didn't have it, but the crates on the original Resident Evil 4 were a kind of like a lit colour, so they were, background assets were darker, but the lit ones were like a brighter brown, and you could tell that this was a destroyable environment. I guess it's just taking it to the next level by making it a completely different colour. And well, despite the yellow paint, the game still did very well. You can see Resident Evil 4 got 93 by the critics and then 8.1 by the user score, so people still loved it. The paint was just a minor issue, and I'm sure a lot of people just saw it and thought, oh, I need to climb this ladder or I need to destroy this box, and then just forgot about that. They didn't overthink it in that sort of sense. And while we might complain about the very easy intuitiveness and that we think, oh, the games back then were fine and they were less, obvious and intuitive, you can see that kind of like the griminess of the old UI. You could say like the text, the background images kind of making it hard to read the text for some people. And here with the typewriter as well, like this color, perhaps some people who are as visually impaired might not be able to see it as well. So it's just, you can see like generally it's a more clunky, darker UI sort of aesthetic. And well, when we look at the younger generation, well, they're not as tech literate as you might think. In fact, they could be about as good as your granddad or older people who didn't grow up with tech at all, who don't know how to use a computer. Well, the young generation also don't really know how to use a computer. Well, there's no at least survey or research data I can really find that kind of like really backs up. People are talking about it, and I think to an extent, it kind of makes at least anecdotal sense in the fact that kids these days and younger people did not grow up with computers. They grow up instead with smartphones, which don't have a keyboard and such, and they just kind of just worked. So in this, from Hacker News, someone was talking about that Gen Z are not digital natives. So Gen Z kind of like your early 20s, your teens, that's about that era. They're not in tech savvy, might be type very quickly with a phone, but they tend not to know technology. The phone, it just works. They don't need to really know about it. They don't need to do any tinkering. Not like, let's say, the MS-DOS days where you actually did know how to need to tinker with the such limited resources, and there wasn't even UI, so you knew how to type effectively in the type commands. And even beyond that, with your Windows XP and systems with the viruses. You have to manage those. There was less security. There was more issues installing drivers. Things are just not present on the phone. The phone tells you you need to update. You can just press a button, it'll update. So, in continuing, the more Gen Z I met, the more I realized that the worst prepared generation. I guess that's subjective, but simple things like sending an email are unknown to a lot of them. You know, it's just text messages all through the phone now, and so people are just kind of talking about it. You know, I think this person says, I think this is because once a technology has reached a point where everyone uses it, it also is at the point where it requires no skill or understanding to use. It's easy to have a mechanic fix your car, and it is easy to buy a new phone, laptop when it performs poorly. And I think this comparison between a car is a good one. You know, you used to have to hand crank an engine for a really old car, but now cars, you just buy them, you put them in key ignition, turn on, it says check engine light, or you know, you just take them into mechanic, and you know, that's really it. That's as far as, you know, you don't need to be changing spark plugs all the time. That can all be done by a mechanic, as maybe traditionally you would have all had to do that change, you know, do an oil change yourself. But not everyone agrees, you know, this is so wrong. Some people are completely out-touched and see like motionists care about results to make life easier, not the underlying tech. That's why a ton of lawyers showed it going around, so people don't have to work as hard. Then, you know, contribute yourself. You say I'm wrong, but you know, you just confirm they are technologists by using it more than ever. So there is like a bit of a tension between it. You know, there's a young generation that are going to get into programming that are obviously going to be tech literate, but there's also going to be people that aren't. This Forbes article also discusses it about how Gen Z, the young generation, now entering the workforce with a good chunk of them possibly being tech illiterate, and suggesting that there is a study from Dell which surveyed quite a few, 15,000 decent size, and found 37 felt that schools are not adequately prepared for the demands of a digital world, and 56 have received minimal to no digital skills in education, which is whatever that means. And unfortunately, the link that supposedly goes to this study just goes to another article which talks about the study, which just again abstracts over it. I would like to see the actual study, but unfortunately I cannot find the link here for it. So what does this have to do with video games and being intuitive? Well, they might find it difficult to navigate or play these games if it's just not told them or shown them where to do, because they were not part of that time where games and computers where you did have to figure it out. It wasn't as straightforward, and you had to be far more knowledgeable. But then again, you know, Gen Z, they're not like didn't play games. There are games on the smartphone. There are obviously games on consoles in the earlier generation. It depends what you kind of define Gen Z. If a 20-year-old is obviously perhaps even played the GameCube or the DS and the Xbox 360, most likely, they were of the time where games were less intuitive. Yes, they were more intuitive than your Nintendo 64 or Super Nintendo Entertainment Systems. Some games are just going to be naturally less intuitive, and a good example is Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, and this is a 48-minute video on how to play the game. Really, it's essentially how you can set your character up before you even play. That's how long it is, that's how deep the game is, and how skills are really important. And as you can see, this is in no way intuitive. The player cannot simply pick up the game and play it. They could try, and it would be a lot of trial and error. Oh, this didn't work, and then they have to go back and do it. And it's not the way you should really play the game. And when this game did originally came out, you were meant to read the manual to really understand how you create a character to have a great experience. If we compare this to Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim, they really toned down the sort of deepness and RPG mechanics of the game. And so the games actually play so differently. With Skyrim, you can be a mage, warrior, archer all in one, and the skills are super simplified. You just simply play the game, use the weapons, you get the abilities as you progress. You don't have a deep character customization, you don't choose your major and minor skills. You can't choose your phobias, you just create the character and you choose your species, which have some disadvantages really. That's all there is. It's not like in Daggerfall 2 where you could choose your character and they had special bonuses. The Argonians, for example, were obviously great at swimming. You could choose your phobias, so you could be fear or something, but then you could pick some, and this would change the difficulty and how much XP you gain, and that meant you could choose some other advantages, like you could become disease resistant, and you could do all this that was really in depth. That's just not there on Skyrim. So making a game intuitive, you can take away the charm or the actual the meat of the game. If your game is focused on being this in-depth RPG, then it's going to be naturally less intuitive. You're targeting a far more niche audience. Skyrim was very successful, but it was intuitive and it did target a very big audience. But maybe those hardcore fans felt, like, this game could have been so much better if we did have those deep mechanics, and I could really feel like I was playing a character that was niche, specialized in a certain niche. If we go back to this, the whole idea of From Software games being easy to Souls-like, then what could happen is that these games just become generic and boring, and they lose sight of what the game is meant to be and how it's meant to be played. So if they were adding automatically blocking or automatic parrying, the game might come off as more generic. A lot of the fun is the reward mechanic of defeating huge bosses that you have to know their moveset, you have to constantly dodge their attacks, and you have to time your attacks well in order to defeat them. And it's why these games have become so famous for just, it's like I beat this game. It's supposed to be a very challenging game, and there's that kind of like prestige behind it. But it's also important that it's not just that it's difficult, it just makes it fun as well. It makes it very enjoyable, but not for everyone. Not everyone's going to enjoy a very difficult game. Like, God of War, apparently, you can just basically press one button and it'll do an automatic combo for you, right? That would not be fun in Dark Souls, but in God of War, it's, it's a more cinematic, linear experience, and it's great for people that just, want to have a nice break to come back from work or come back from school, and they're just going to continue the story like that. They don't want to be, getting frustrated on a boss that they've been trying to fight over and over again. Some people, I really like the Dark Souls bosses and the way that game plays, as opposed to those kind of just linear experiences. There is, personal preference. You can't just make every game super easy, as not everyone wants a super easy, intuitive game. They want something that's challenging and really makes them think on how to tackle a situation. And so, what is your experience with games being too intuitive, and with the examples of the yellow paint, or games just being too easy, telling you what to do? Do you think that it's getting a bit too far? Do you think they should make games less intuitive and get players to think? Or are you just someone who, I come back from work and I just want to play a game and I don't want to think too much about it? And then do comment down below. And also about what it's like in game development. Are you someone making a game? Are you trying to make it a challenging experience, or are you thinking of making it, how do you make it so the player understands what they need to be doing? And I'll see you in more videos.